Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on modernising security operations and achieving greater resilience. My name is Duncan Brown and I'm a Vice President at IDC in Europe, where I'm responsible for security, trust and compliance. We have an esteemed panel with us today, which I'll introduce in just a second. But before we do that, just a couple of quick housekeeping items to share with you. This session is being recorded and we will share the recording with you afterwards. You can listen to it all again if that's your pleasure. And the other thing is that we will be taking questions as we go if we're able to, and there's time at the end of the session for to answer any Q&A that we haven't managed to address during the discussion. So do use the Q&A panel at the bottom of your Zoom screen, type your question in there, and we will endeavour to answer all of your questions as we go within the time allotted. Wish us luck. I think that might be a bit of a challenge. Okay, so I said that we had an esteemed panel with us, and it's my great pleasure to introduce the panel today. So firstly, we have Chris Kashigin, who's the Senior Director at CrowdStrike. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Chris, can you tell us a little bit about what you do at CrowdStrike?
Yeah, sure thing. So I help basically CrowdStrike build out our entire ecosystem with technology partners. So for example, Sumo and AWS, and my team builds and maintains the predominant bulk of the external tech integrations that we've got. And then a little bit about me as well. I spent about 20 years in the industry so far. First half of it or so spent at a large defense contractor in security operations, hunting, incident response, that kind of stuff. And then for the past about 8 years or so, been working at products companies trying to help build better tooling to bring it to the customers and give them better security outcomes. Great.
So you have the sharp pointy end as well as the vendor solution end. So it's a good perspective. Good to hear.
Yes, sir.
So next we have Rob Hale, who's a security partner segment lead at AWS. Hi, Rob.
Hi, Duncan. Thanks very much for having me.
Our pleasure. What do you got to at AWS, Rob?
So I lead AWS's security segment in EMEA. So basically what that means is I get to help our customers improve their security and accelerate their business at the same time, and together with our partners and our native services that customers are using. So really helping customers with security best practice, but also helping our partners in terms of get to market and go to market with the services that customers actually really want. So I've been at Amazon for coming up to 4 years now, but 24 years in security for a variety of tech roles and product lead roles.
Lots of experience there. Super, Rob. Thanks. Good to have you. And last but certainly not least, we have Girish Bhatt, who's the Vice President of Security at Sumo Logic. Hi, Girish. Nice to see you again.
Likewise, Duncan. Hey, glad to be participating in this, what I think proposes to be a very informative session. Yes, I lead a few functions at Sumo. I have global responsibility for key aspects of many GTM functions, including security, platform, market intelligence. And a typical day for me starts with engaging our strategic partners. I'm glad to have 3 of our strategic partners here in AWS, CrowdStrike, and strategic influencers like Duncan, with whom I've worked for many years now. Absolutely ecstatic to be on this panel, folks. Thanks for the invite.
No problem. Good to have you all. So just let me map out a bit of an introduction what we see at IDC as a broad landscape for security. There are 3 what I call mega challenges for security operations team. The first is what we call the dynamic threat landscape. That's more bad stuff happening more often to more people. And we deal with this problem every day. It should be quite familiar to all security professionals. There seems to be no let up to the threat landscape. There's new attack approaches and new malware variants are emerging all the time. So that's something that should be very familiar with us all on this call. The second mega challenge is the attack surface is increasing constantly. We've seen this in the past year, where many organizations sent their employees to work from home and then suddenly realized that their home environments are not secure environments. So that was a really typical example. But this is part of the ongoing trend as organizations pursue their digital transformation strategies, which obviously involves migration to the cloud, adoption of Internet things, and other devices outside the traditional firewall, increased collaboration and data sharing with outside parties, so customers, partners, suppliers, and so on. Again, there's no let up in this trend. It's just something that security professionals have had to learn to live with. And the third big mega challenge is regulation and compliance. We don't hear so much about this today, certainly not as much as we used to when GDPR was coming to the market. But it remains an ever-present concern. And of course, it's not just limited to data protection and privacy. There are many other country-specific and industry-specific regulations that security ops folks need to be aware of. And in fact, cybersecurity as a CEO and nation state concern is only ever increasing. So I think we're going to see even more regulation, standards, and scrutiny over what IT security operations is actually doing on a day-to-day basis. So these are the three big trends: the threat landscape, the increased attack surface, and regulation and compliance. But they have substantial consequences that impact directly onto security operations. And the first of these, possibly the main one, is skills. We have a constant shortage of trained and experienced professionals in our industry, and every organization suffers from this, both end users and vendors, and dare I say analyst companies as well. This is then driving many organizations to look at automation and orchestration tools to at least try and simplify the role of the security operations team and get at least perhaps the more trivial operations capability automated. But there's one big impediment to this that I see, and that's that most organizations have this patchwork of security tools that don't integrate, don't share information, and all have to be managed independently. So we're seeing an increased interest in tool consolidation within companies, or at least an increased focus on buying tools that integrate with each other with the aim of increasing efficiency and interoperability. It sounds like a bit of nirvana, but that's, I think, what many organizations are trying to do. And of course, integration is also happening between security and other parts of IT, particularly application development, or app dev, as we call it. So with that brief introduction, let me open up the discussion to Rob, Girish, and Chris, and I'll stop sharing the slide as well. So let's begin with this aspect of integration between security and app dev that I close with. Girish, let me come to you first. How do you see the state of integration? Are we there yet? Or is it just beginning to happen? Where are we along this continuum? And how would you characterize this integration?
Yeah, I think that's a very timely question, Duncan. What to answer your question upfront, it's still at the early stage. Let me clarify why. Because historically, and to a large extent even today, app dev, DevOps, and as well as security operations are almost separate functions in many enterprises today. And that continues to be the case in many companies. However, we are seeing a significant change in the direction, particularly companies who are what I would call a bit more innovative, as well as have realized that there are better ways of doing it. We have seen many companies that might have started, who might have been on-prem only environments, and as they're modernizing their IT stack, application stack, as well as security stack, trying to bring the convergence together. If I may add a little bit more to that, so what we are seeing is three broad trends. This is what we are calling as cloud journey, and I'm sure Rob from AWS can relate, as so can Chris as well. We are seeing three broad categories. That's companies who are historically on-prem based, who are kind of trying to experiment with cloud. We call them the cloud start category companies. And there are companies who have experimented with cloud and have realized that there's significant benefit, and they've declared we are going to be cloud first. That is, everything that we do are cloud first henceforward. And then of course, the emerging and the more interesting category is the so-called cloud native companies, where you have likes of Netflix, Airbnb, as well as other companies across the world, EMEA, Asia, or in US. So what I'm seeing is, depending on the inclination or where they are in their modernization journey, which seems to be almost analogous with cloud journey these days, Duncan, there is a better convergence between application development, IT modernization, and security modernization. We can discuss this more, as I would love to hear from our esteemed panelists as well on this topic.
Yeah, Chris, you must be seeing a lot in your area. What's your sense of the unification between security and app dev?
Well, it's been an interesting journey to watch, right? So even before all these, the lockdowns and everything else began, we were seeing a massive and monumental shift of infrastructure to the cloud, right? It's just faster and easier with regard to using, operational expenses versus CapEx stuff like you would see with the historical pieces. But it also gives them the ability to expand like they've never had to before, right? And along those exact same lines, it's interesting from CrowdStrike, from an endpoint security company, we traditionally protected servers, desktops, laptops, virtual machines, all that kind of good stuff. But obviously, with the emergence of cloud, we've had to go into the cloud native space, meaning that, hey, people are writing code nonstop. They're publishing them as dynamic functions that live over on the cloud side. They live for a couple seconds to a couple minutes, and boom, they're reinstantiated shortly thereafter for some net new things. So with that said, when we're used to seeing stuff around, we're used to dealing with, say, IT operations and security operations professionals. And now we're dealing with DevSecOps folks, meaning that they're the ones writing the code, publishing the code, making sure things that are up and operational. So what we had to do is actually change how we deal with not basically deliver security solutions for platforms they need, but also be able to give that persona, right, the ability and control and the fundamental understanding of how security has to work in a cloud native environment, so that we can be basically an enabler of, yes, we can help you secure it, and yes, we can help you provide us with business operations without being an impediment, right? So it's been a fun journey to be a part of so far.
It's absolutely fascinating, as you say. It is a journey. I mean, this integration is part of a larger application modernization shift that's going on. Rob, you must be at the sharp end of that. What challenges are companies facing in scaling their security teams as they modernize their wider application stack? And perhaps maybe start with what actually is modernization, the stack modernization, application modernization. I think that might be the place to kick off.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of add on some of the points that Chris and Girish brought up earlier. So, I like to use this analogy. So businesses used to face a binary choice, and that was to move fast or stay secure. In today's world, that's just not true. So businesses absolutely have to become more agile. They need to be able to react to global events. And in fact, we've seen a huge shift in how we work with working from home because of the COVID situation. The businesses want and need to move faster and take advantage of the benefits of the cloud. That means they don't want to be burdened with large monolithic architectures that are in data centers that take weeks and months to deliver. They need to be able to deliver new services that are accessible to all of their customers at a larger scale, to take advantage of the benefits of the cloud, but also a rapid kind of development to launch time scale where they can lower their costs and also take advantage of new technologies such as serverless, or maybe even package applications into containers. So they don't need to manage that infrastructure. That means they can move faster and make their services, both for customers and also for us as employees, easier to access, easier to use. And as part of that, you've got customers who are wanting to free themselves from the old monolithic licensing and proprietary databases. I mean, last count, we had 450,000 databases migrated to AWS through the database migration service. And actually, Aurora is our fastest growing service, and that's a database service within AWS. So application owners really want to change the way that they deliver applications, to deliver a service rapidly and then iterate at scale. So security has to change to enable that to happen. So CISOs can't do this, and security operations teams can't do this on their own. They cannot be a red line at the end of a development process that says, actually, you shall not pass because you're not passing the security test that we're now putting in place. So CISOs are looking at ways that they can instill a security culture further left. A phrase we use is shift left in that development side pipeline. So they're looking at how do we actually create security owners in our dev teams that build security best practice into their pipeline. They want to be involved at project conception stage, not right at the end of that development cycle, because we know that has a really bad effect on both delivering new services, but also security. That's not a good place to have that security integration. You need the security integration at inception level. So really what they want to be able to do is to enable the business to move fast and stay secure. And there's a number of different ways that they're doing that, from integrating security as code, so you're building secure and compliant environments with all the controls and policies in place, and they templatize them. So actually, when your development teams are launching a new service, they can rapidly spin up new services of architectures that you know are secure. They're also then trying to look at actually skills gap. How do we ensure that our cloud security knowledge is there to enable that transformation? So the security teams are rapidly trying to evolve and also skill up people in the dev teams to understand how to implement security best practice and then implement solutions for response to scale their security teams. And then lastly, we have kind of challenges around creating security owners and board accountability. So how are organizations actually creating security owners by making security posture and metrics actually something that's measured at board level from a line of business owner? And we see a huge amount of drive from CISOs in that area, because what they need to be able to do is to create security owners on the board. So security is not just the security team's job.
Just picking up on that last point then, Rob, I mean, that's quite a departure from as it were, the old days, where kind of security was thrown over the wall and it was something that was done to you rather than with you. And also this idea of distributing security ownership. Again, it used to be there was a security team and it was their job to make things secure or not. And what you're saying now is that responsibility is now being distributed. So interesting to see.
Yeah, I think it's a case of the ultimate responsibility for security still lies with the CISO, but that model doesn't work in an agile environment. So really, what they're trying to do is create security ownership. So security is as important as profitability, for example, as important as development time scale. And that has great benefits for the line of business owners as well, because actually, if they can ensure their service is secure from design through concepts and through to launch, they have a smoother launch that protects their customer data, much more effectively, and they earn customer trust by doing that.
Yeah, low risk and it enhances customer reputation and so on. Yeah, interesting stuff. I think we'll come back to several of these areas that you mentioned. You talked about speed, you talked about skills and so on as well. Really interesting. I just wanted to pick up on what may be the major challenge in migrating security to cloud, which is that it's different from an on-prem environment. I think we all agree, I think the industry agrees, that security in the cloud is as good as, if not better than, an on-prem environment, but it's different. Chris, you kind of work at the endpoint workload end of things. What do you think? What do you think endpoint workload security looks like in the era of the cloud?
Well, I think we're going to have to support, obviously, the cloud and all the new paradigms that it supports, but also it's going to be really a hybridization longer term. On-prem stuff isn't going away anytime soon. In fact, I'd argue that it never will, right? But what I think becomes the most challenging with regard to securing the cloud is going to be that you have the virtual machines, right, and all the stuff you're used to securing. And there's very good knowledge bases out there. People understand that the process, procedures, how to secure those things, and more importantly, when something gets popped, they also know how to go back and triage and do the instant responses and stop the bleeding effectively, and then close things down and secure it further. where everyone's spoken about so far with regard to skills gaps, right? We've got a significant lack in industry in general, people that understand cloud, but not just the concepts of deploying things like applications as code, but actually securing those things as well, right? So basically, what you'll continue to see, especially from vendors like us, is the continued push to introducing net new technologies to be able to secure modernized platforms. So, for example, you see us rolling out things like container protection, and we now have the ability to hook into all the AWS APIs to extract out data sets we need, so we can figure out if there's a breach, is there something going on, is something misconfigured, right? All those different pieces. And to that end, I think it's really comes to a point of making sure that we are able to give the analysts and the operators and the developers the ability set to have consistent, predictable security from whether it's on-prem to cloud, right? But as they're shifting more into the cloud space, especially in cloud native, right, where again it's mostly code, how do we actually deliver that stuff so that it can be part of the automated build process, the CI/CD pipeline, right? And then once they actually deliver the code space and then jumps up within the Kubernetes cluster and you're running within the pods, right? How do we secure all those things? And so, yeah, I think at this point, it's just delivering a good, consistent security that can be transparent around all the different functions, but also enable the teams to respond in consistent ways when needed for a breach or other incidents.
Yeah, I love the way you just drop in the containers and serverless and Kubernetes and all that kind of stuff. Girish, I didn't mean to come back to you before as well. I mean, you must be saying a whole bunch of these technologies. How does that kind of all come together in terms of securing application modernization and cloud migration at the same time? What are you seeing? What do you think the dangers are?
Yeah, there were three discrete set of business outcomes there. I like the way in which you post that question, Duncan, because you post the right question, because they're a common issue. So, however, what we see many companies looking at cloud migration, app modernization or migration, as well as security modernization as three separate activities, right? So that's inherent, because the CIO or CISO, if the reporting structure is different, they have different business mandates and outcomes. Eventually, they all need to come together, because we all know cloud migration is not just about moving servers from wherever your private data centers are to pick your favorite cloud. AWS, obviously, here, right? We love other clouds also, folks. But so the point is, it's lot more than that. What happens to the underlying apps? Do you lift and shift them? Do you rewrite them? Do you refactor them? It's all of the above. You can't just say I'm going to migrate to the cloud and not modernize your app stack without considering the security stack as well. Chris talked about provided some good insights on the workload protection and Kubernetes. Kubernetes itself, we support 20 different versions of Kubernetes, right? I mean, people consider Kubernetes, hey, this is some sort of one single distribution. No, it's not. And underneath that, there's different challenges of securing them. So the agility and the innovation that modernization brings from a cloud migration as well as app migration continues to keep security professionals busy. It's going beyond the server endpoint network paradigms and looking at things like Kubernetes, the containers, the container orchestration platform, like your favorite Kubernetes distribution, and emerging to serverless. That's a different paradigm now. You have ephemeral functions that may come and go in a matter of seconds or minutes at most. These are fascinating times, and I think what our approach is, and our customers are saying is, you talked about this earlier, too many tools. Let's figure out how to bring them together. It could be a platform of your choice, a cloud platform, or a analytics platform, or a security platform that's all bringing it together. That's the direction what we are seeing and coming from our customers, saying, hey, can I solve more than one use case with your solution or platform? That's a direction what we are hearing from our customers, Duncan.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Just a quick check on Q&A. I can see some questions coming in, which I think we'll get to. A lot of people are interested in skills, so we'll get to that in just a moment. But if you do have questions, then do put them in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. I mentioned in my introduction that compliance and regulations is a key issue, and obviously security is deeply related to that, and that's also changing with cloud. Rob, you must be seeing a lot of this, being a cloud, one of the leaders in cloud adoption. What are you seeing as the trends in compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to kind of consider is that I joined AWS almost 4 years ago, and at that time I really had some kind of preconceived ideas about who would and wouldn't migrate to the cloud and what sort of workloads they'd be migrating. And actually, what I've discovered is that actually customers from every segment, regardless of how sensitive the workloads are or how much regulation, are moving workloads to the cloud. I mean, for example, we have customers in pharmaceuticals around developing new medicines and vaccines, for example. It's all been developed in the cloud. We have tier 1 banks who are moving core banking operations and operating those from the AWS cloud. So there really isn't kind of workloads that aren't operated in the cloud, and there's some reasons for that. One of the main things is that, look, compliance is not going away. So, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it really isn't going away, but it's still valid. Many of its frameworks is still valid in the cloud. PCI DSS or HIPAA, or if it's FedRAMP or GDPR, and the FIPS and NIST, they're all valid. But often they're achieved more effectively, if somewhat differently, when you migrate to the cloud. So one of the biggest factors that customers talk to me about is actually when they migrate to the cloud, it enables them to narrow the scope of their compliance. So with AWS taking ownership of physical security, for example, in a data center and the underlying hardware, that allows their security teams to actually focus on the configuration, on the applications, who has access to the data. That enables them to focus on business outcomes and not kind of tick boxing against compliance requirements that now are handled by their cloud partner. And then the second piece is actually, if you have to try and implement security compliance and security on-prem, it's actually pretty difficult. When you move to the cloud, you can start to implement infrastructure as code. And if you're implementing infrastructure as code, that actually enables compliance as code. So now the cloud allows customers to achieve continuous compliance, which has always been one of those holy grails of security and on-prem. And you can do that with automation by helping your developers to architect really securely from the get-go. But also you can receive alerts when they're out of compliance, and then you can implement best practice and mitigation, for example. So you can achieve continuous compliance and rapid mitigation of those threats. And we see a huge amount of customers talking to us about how moving to the cloud has made it easier to comply with the compliance frameworks versus a very difficult environment, and often different environments on-prem.
Interesting. So
if I can jump in there, sorry.
Yeah, do please.
Yeah, so to Rob's point, we hear the same thing. Many of our customers, prospects come to us saying, it may be start off as a checkbox saying, hey, are you PCI compliant, DSS 3.2, whatever, a HIPAA version, SOC 2 type 2, it starts off as a checkbox, right? But then what they're really asking is this cloud provider or security solution provider like CrowdStrike or other, right? Are they following good practice, security practices, the right access control, the right mechanisms? That's what really they're asking for. Obviously, the ones who are coming from a regulation perspective, they want the checkbox to build their business on top of a cloud provider, whether it's AWS, Sumo, whoever it is, right? But nevertheless, this is an indicative to give more confidence so that it's an assurance to build, particularly when they're building their business on one or more platforms. That's what we consistently hear from our customers.
Yeah, it just strikes me there's a huge amount of change happening in security, and we're getting towards the murky skills question. Just before we get there, I'm just wondering whether we're settling on an archetype for security that will provide a little bit more cohesiveness and coordination. Chris, do you think there's an archetype for security in the cloud that's emerging?
I do. So quite frankly, I do think that the going trend, well, sorry, what's happening and the trend that'll be finalized over here if it's not already done. So at this point is around making sure that you have the consistent tooling, right? So it's integrated between both normal, say, cloud instances like VMs, and then you have other stuff that works very well within the containers, other parts of the orchestration infrastructure. But that said, you will see that, I think it was to Rob's point earlier, that the security teams will be embedded with the application developer tiers that Girish had mentioned, and we'll see that continuing forward. And I'll even use my own example that I had a problem with last week, right? So I know I have all these automation scripts and Terraforms and all these other things that I write to make sure that I build up my stuff fairly easily. And I did something via the one console, and I forgot to apply certain tags to my system, right? And you can't secure what you don't know about, right? So within a couple hours of me not tagging my systems properly, boom, finance was all over me, and then some other group was all over me. So what becomes really interesting is that if you follow all the defined processes and automations and other things, right? All the this kind of basically emerges where you can use automation to, and again, so literally infrastructure and security and everything as code as part of the build pipeline. I think that's what's going to be the future here, and that's what's going to allow us to have that consistency that we again mentioned a couple of times throughout this call. So.
Yeah, interesting. And presumably it's not just having a security architecture, but it's all the soft stuff that goes around that. So Rob, yeah. What are you seeing in terms of partnerships, ecosystems that form the cloud? So not just the technology, but kind of all the other parties that are playing in this space.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that the customers kind of realize when they move to the cloud is, in the old world, in the on-prem world, they're responsible for everything. And as it moves to the cloud, it's a shared responsibility model, and actually AWS pioneered the shared security responsibility model that I think is now pretty much accepted by all customers and all organizations as they move to the cloud. So this is where the cloud provider, AWS, is responsible for the security of the cloud, so the underlying hardware, all the regions, availability zones, edge locations, etc. Handling all the infrastructure, the compute, the networking, and software layers. Customers are then able to focus on their choice of security configuration within the cloud. So that's encryption policy. In fact, out of the 117 AWS services that actually store data, all of those are fully compliant with encryption capabilities, so customers can choose exactly which encryption standards they want to apply. Looking at things like the operating system and the network and the firewall configuration, and then how does their IAM system work, and how are they handling access to customer data? Where are they hosting that data, for example? These are all policy decisions and things that customers care about. And the shared responsibility model kind of allows them to focus in on those elements. The other thing we're seeing is that, as well as that cultural shift in terms of creating security owners and a security culture within the business, security teams are looking at their tool sets. So their ISVs, their managed service providers, for example, their consultancy, and they really want to ensure that the services they're using are actually deeply integrated with the services they're using in the cloud. So, some of the technologies they use on-prem may not operate very well when they move to the cloud. So they're really looking at how do we consolidate down our tool set to those that help us both in an on-prem world, but also as we move to the cloud, which are deeply integrated with services that we care about. And that may be, moving to, EC2 instances and S3, but actually more and more customers are looking at their end point. So how are they going to get, where they're going to get to in their end game of application modernization? So really what they're looking at is partners who integrate with, serverless, for example, if that's their end point that they want to get to, or containers. And so what they're looking for is partners who can help them get from where they are now and continue the evolution through to the end game. And then it allows customers to be more agile and again, focusing on what matters for them.
Super. A lot to think about, which neatly brings us on to this this murky topic of skills. Rob, let me come to you first, and I'm sure the other guys will have a view on this. So we talked about skills. We've talked about the need for automation to address some of the skills shortfall. Do you see automation as having a fundamental role? Where does that sit? Does it sit within the security team? Is there a security team? Is it folded into the mythical DevSecOps or SecDevOps, or however you position that? How do you see that developing?
Yeah, I think it starts with changing that security culture. So yeah, absolutely, you need ownership of security. You need a CISO. That CISO absolutely has to report into the CEO in any modern organization. And actually, that's our arrangement at AWS. They need to have the power to enable business, but also to safeguard the business as well. But they also are looking at how they create more security owners in the line of business. So whether that's through coaching, whether that's through metrics, for example, so they care about those metrics as much as profitability. But also they need to be very cognizant of the fact that the business is moving faster. And with faster business comes more demand from a very finite pool of resources, as Krish and Girish have pointed out earlier on around, there's a finite number of security professionals and there's a smaller number of cloud security professionals. And actually they're in demand, and particularly in the UK and EMEA, as well as in other regions, we see an increasing skills gap. But actually, it's one that companies are finding some interesting ways of filling. So, bringing line of business operatives into a security role. So teaching, somebody who knows about IoT, teaching those people around security, not necessarily trying to take a career security person and trying to teach them around, operational technology. Things like the Restart program that AWS is launching, which is providing people with free training and certification for cloud and security certifications. But then they're also trying to make sure that the people they have are best used. And so if you have a level 3 analyst, you don't want that level 3 analyst to be looking at a policy that's wrong. Somebody has created an admin account and is using that for operations. That's bad policy that should be amended very, very rapidly. But it's not something that necessarily means that a level 3 analyst needs to have a look at that. That's something that can be mitigated using alerts and using automation in terms of runbooks, whether that is a supervised runbook. So you have a SOC analyst who's then running that playbook and implementing a response, and we see this increasingly, but not quite as prevalent yet, full automation in terms of, look, we're going to, if there's something that's just really, really basic and simple, like a basic configuration error, we have customer data on an unencrypted instance, then that is a policy change that needs to be implemented immediately to encrypt that data. Absolutely, you need a ticket created for that and a triage against that, an investigation as to what went on. But actually, the most important thing is that time to mitigation and to free up the human to actually look at stuff that needs contextual analysis. That's where humans kind of really shine. But they need to be able to see what their top priority issues are, above all the noise that can be created from all the security data coming in.
Yeah, it's a tricky job for sure. And presumably, as the stack modernizes, it also consolidates, or one would hope that would be an outcome of this. Girish, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing in terms of this the consolidation?
It's definitely a good thing. So I kind of want to pick the thread on what Rob was hitting on, right? Because it's if I look at how the concept of security operations, or how a security operations center and the staffing has evolved over time, it's interesting in the sense that historically we classify the staffing as level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 hunter, engineer. I've seen more and more modern SOCs go away from that concepts because there are better technologies, there are better tools, there's better awareness, there's better training. By the way, AWS has some great foundational material for security training, and they offer free certification as well, right? So do few other organizations like SANS and others. Highly encourage people to get educated. So in other words, the tiered analyst hierarchy is being collapsed in a modern SOC or equivalent. So that's primarily driven by not only people being more self-aware and getting trained on security, as well as the tools and technologies helping them do better. So I think Rob talked about the concept of a playbook. To create a playbook, you need to know security. You need to know IT and different tools and technologies, right? But it may take you few minutes, few hours, few days to create a playbook, but executing a playbook will happen in a matter of seconds. Again, it's with the human in the loop. So you're empowering the next generation of security professionals to do more with better tools and technologies. So I find it quite interesting that modernization of security, it may start with a tool or a technology or with a business outcome. It's actually even modernizing how we think about solving particular use cases or challenges. It's a good time to be a security professional.
If you like being busy as well. Yeah. Listen, gents, amazingly, we're kind of coming towards the end of the allotted time. We will have some extra time for Q&A, but I just wanted to put one final question to each of you, which is how do you see security evolving in the next, say, 2 years? What do you think will be the major innovations or revelations that we'll see? Chris, let me come to you first.
Yeah, sounds good. So it's interesting. Actually, I think it was both Girish and Rob had mentioned before about some of that this convergence where things are going to get modernized very quickly. What I'm actually expecting to see is a bit more sprawl, even of legacy tech, as people do the modernization, right? So, for example, I have to make sure I can protect, say, like human machine interfaces on shop floors, protecting manufacturing facilities, all the way up to, say, containers running within AWS. And I have to deliver consistent security in that particular space. But the cool part here is that we are seeing the path for people shifting away from legacy tech, legacy operations pieces, because they want the speed and agility to do things. So to that end, I do think that within the next couple of years, you will see probably permanent adoption of either cloud and or other cloud concepts. So, for example, shifting away from virtual machines over into containers, which case another we'll call it just cloud native functionality. So as things happen, the skills gap has to obviously close, and people need to learn those new pieces of technology if they want to stay relevant within the field. To that exact end, though, as well, it's all about the data at this point, right? Especially when it comes to how I look at things from a security perspective. So it's not just getting data generated in a particular way so we can discover, stop breaches, all this other kind of good stuff, but also taking additional third-party pieces of data for context, so you can really do any type of detection and response and mitigation components based on autonomous functions. So yeah, I think you will see that with pretty much full automations being adopted here over the next couple of years, because quite frankly, there's no way to keep up without it.
Yeah, automation as an imperative. Interesting. Rob.
Thanks, Duncan. Yeah, I think we'll continue to see customers, accelerate into the cloud. We'll also see kind of a merger of both enterprise and operational technology as well into the same ownership and under responsibility of the CIO and the CISO. We'll also see, more of the major workloads moving to the cloud. And if we look at it now, we're really scraping, particularly in enterprise space, we're just scraping the surface of customers migrating workloads, but we're seeing larger and larger and more core workloads like ERP start to move across at scale. We'll also see more use of abstracted services and services like containers and serverless as those larger business and application owners want to drive app modernization. And that also means that security tools are going to have to change. They're going to have to be more deeply integrated with those services that the business wants to move to. And we'll see security based less on that hard perimeter of firewalls and network security it has been in the past, And obviously, you know, the whole work from home piece has kind of blown that out of the water anyway. But less of these large monolithic apps that can only be accessed from inside the network, and more, you know, web apps that can be accessed from mobile devices, etc. And that creates more challenges in terms of security as well. And you see concepts like zero trust, you know, used more and more around that. We'll also, you know, see more regulation, more focus on data. You know, who has access to it? Why? Where is that data? Do we need it? And then we'll also see more data for the security teams to kind of process. So we need, you know, more focus on automation and tools that help humans to scale in that environment.
Cool, lots happening then. Final word to you, Girish, before we get to Q&A.
Cool. I like the way in which you started off the session, Duncan, by talking about the complexity of the threat landscape, and you talked about the emergence of innovative as well as interesting attack vectors. From a security professional perspective, it's fascinating to unpack what those are. However, I think bottom line is it all comes to threat detection and response across the IT and security stack. That's how I look at it. So for that, what we need to continue to do better is we need to provide timely content. What do I mean by that? So there are ways in which many companies, CrowdStrike, Sumo, AWS, and others, in a matter of seconds, we can dispatch an update to improve the security posture of the customer's install base. Cloud makes it very easy. So in other words, we need to provide the content to solve the emerging attack vectors, as well as potential ways in which you could get breached. So in other words, the concept of taking everything as a code to security as a code. Content, in other words, creating the right security content as a code so that customers can update and improve their cyber resilience in a matter of seconds or minutes, as opposed to having to wait for weeks and months. That's what I'm very bullish about from a security industry perspective.
Interesting. Security at the speed of business, sounds like. Fascinating stuff. Super, that's great, gents. We've got a couple of questions that have been posed. So let me just go with one. Are there specific prescriptive approaches to modernizing security ops, SecOps, based on maturity? Girish, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, so that's a loaded question. But I always encourage our partners, customers, everyone, instead of thinking of a tech stack based approach, understand where the customer is today. Or do they have their, what's their, when I talk about maturity, or at least we look at maturity, we look at, do they have the right people in place? Do they have the right tools? Do they have the right workflows or standard operating procedures in place? Rob and Chris talked about automation. Are they even ready to consume and leverage automation? In other words, understand where you are, understand your maturity, and adopt a NIST-like framework, right? I know we have our own maturity model and others. I don't care which model a company, a customer adopts. I would always adopt a NIST or is something equivalent across the pond in EMEA, Duncan and team, right? So from a risk maturity model, a risk management framework, and map the journey accordingly, so that you don't necessarily make a technology-based decision, rather use a maturity model and map what you talked about, people, process, and technology to make the right decision.
Super. One final question. It's a very generic question, so you might all have a view on this. What's the most common security risks that you see? Rob, do you want to have a stab at that first?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I think it's let's go back to basics. Yes, we have APTs and nation state actors who are launching really advanced attacks, but actually most of the issues that the customers deal with are pretty basic. They're things like using an admin account, or someone's posted up an access key, a static access key in their GitHub repository, for example, or they don't have a great joiners, movers, and leavers policy, which means that they have permissions all over the place, or they don't know where their data is. So yeah, focus in on the basics, and if you follow best practice like NIST, for example, and AWS well-architected framework is based around NIST principles, then you can start to implement best practice at the start, and so you can then ensure that these basic errors are not happening and causing bigger issues and security risks further down the line.
Super. I think that is solid advice, Rob. Thanks for that. That's it. We're out of time, believe it or not. We will follow up with you all to share the recording along with some other helpful reference documents. And also, if you asked a question that we didn't have time to get to, we will respond to you individually. So don't worry too much about that. My thanks to Girish, Chris, Rob for their wisdom and insight. And from me, thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Duncan.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.